In 1927, Lin Huiyin graduated from Penn with a fine arts degree. But Lin was an architect in training and in practice. Her influence on architectural preservation and design in China was tremendous, and Penn has long been proud to count Lin among our alumni. Lin earned her degree in architecture many years ago. Because of bias, she was not able to receive it. Now, we correct that mistake and grant her the credentials she deserved.
So in the 1920s, Philadelphia is one of the most prosperous cities in America. It is the workshop of the world. Our population at that time was growing. So it's an incredibly exciting place, and we were known as a place of innovation. And in terms of architecture, the 1920s is an exciting period because we're seeing the build out of one of the most remarkable pieces of City Beautiful architecture in America, the Benjamin Franklin Parkway. The Free Library, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Rodin Museum, important institutional buildings here in the city of Philadelphia are literally rising out of the ground when Lin Huiyin is arriving in the city in the fall of 1924. Must have been very exciting for young architects to see what it is that architects could do and the scale at which they could do it.
Personally, I am impressed with her beyond architecture. She's known to the general public in China as someone who encompasses like this vision of interdisciplinary study of architecture before people even use the word interdisciplinary. You know, from design to architecture, to graphics, to urban studies, and then to poetry and literature. A really significant architect is someone who can bring kind of their insight in architecture into life and I think popular culture as well.
Lin Huiyin was somebody who came into the field of architecture in the 1920s when the pathways for women to enter the profession were still very narrow. There were places where you could go to school and you could get a degree, and from there you still had the question of who's going to hire you. There were all sorts of impediments to practice, and yet she came in and she did everything she could before she arrived here, when she was here, to study everything, every class that her male counterparts did towards getting an architecture degree. She was held back from doing so with some technical, you couldn't take this class, you couldn't take that class.
Lin took all the same courses except for two that the other architecture students took. She really clearly wanted to be an architect. The two courses that she couldn't take, one was figure drawing because she had to draw naked men, and the second was a construction course, and women weren't allowed in job sites. Well, she and the other classmates went back to China, and they were called the first generation of modern Chinese architects. So she had an immense impact on modern Chinese architecture in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. With her husband also had an influence on two of the major schools of architecture in China.
It's very difficult to separate Lin Huiyin from her husband, Liang Sicheng. Two people who fit incredibly well together creatively. They complemented each other in their skills. They were also a husband and wife, so there's a love story there. Immigration records into the United States in 1924, you see them traveling on the same ship. They're in the list of the passenger manifest right next to each other. They're a couple that made a life together. And after studying here and spending a bit more time in the United States and traveling back to China, they dove into the systematic study of classical Chinese architecture. And that really had not been done before. They saw it as essential to the future of Chinese architecture to look at its past, to use it as a basis for creativity moving forward, recognize that there could be aspects of modernity in understanding the traditional forms.
Liang and Liang were in the first generation in China to break away from the feudal system and the Confucius ideology. So they were intellectuals. They pursue freedom, they pursue academic liberality. Their relationship are beyond traditional husband and wife. They're also partners in their work. They travel far into the hinterland in China together, to discover the historic wooden structures. So their relationship really reinforced their collaboration and their contribution to architecture.
I think Lin's work is most significant in historic preservation. She and her partner Liang, they were really the first modern architect in China who started giving importance to the historic buildings. It's less about kind of, formulating a new ideology in architecture, but what they did is sort of the beginning of architecture as a discipline, as a practice, to have the general public as well take kind of interest in the history of architecture from China.
The story of Lin and her husband Liang was an excellent example of this East-West dialogue. So they were trained in this Beaux-Arts system at Penn, but they went back to China and used their training of architecture, Western architecture, to rediscover and to study Chinese wooden architecture and integrating the traditional aesthetic and value of China.
So as part of the process of really asking ourselves the question, what was Lin Huiyin's accomplishment as a student here? We went back to the primary sources that we have, and there are documents like the student transcripts, not just for her, but for her classmates, lists and descriptions of the courses, the requirements. There are faculty meeting minutes where they discuss the process about how they might go about admitting women into the program and what restrictions might be in place. So the things that surprised me about looking that closely and that intensively is how much she did.
Several friends of mine told me they went to architectural school because of Lin, because they admire Lin's artistic accomplishments. Because in China, architecture is considered an engineering major, predominantly male students. 30 years ago, when I was an architectural student, but this landscape has changed dramatically because of female architects like Lin Huiyin and many others.
I think this brings to light that there was a time when women could not get an architecture degree. It's like going back to history and reversing some kind of injustice.
To me, Lin Huiyin is an inspiration. She's one of those figures that you come across in the work that you do every day. And so for me to have a small role in helping build support amongst the community here at Penn, to say, hey, this is someone who really needs to be recognized as someone who, in her lifetime, in that moment when she was here stepping out in a cap and gown, she should have been someone getting a Bachelor's of Architecture. It's incredibly satisfying to have been part of an effort to make that happen.
To the Chinese students and alumni who are here, I think it recognizes their culture. Still in the Western world, most of our study of architecture history and theory is still based on kind of this, Eurocentric lens. And so providing a different perspective from China and through kind of her research and her scholarship, I think it recognizes that, there's importance in Chinese architecture history.
I think for the Lin family, it's a celebration and a bit of closure. I think it's significant that on her tombstone, it's her name and then architect. Just recognizing who she was is really, I think, important for the Lin family, but I think architecture more broadly. For us here at Penn, it's an opportunity to correct a mistake we made.
The education she received at Penn allowed her to master Western principles and use them in the service of thousands of years of Chinese history. Her architectural skill made an enormous difference in China, and Penn is so proud of the bridge she built between our nations. It is our privilege to award Lin Huiyin her Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Pennsylvania Stuart Weitzman School of Design.